Okay, we're live. Hello, class, and welcome to Unit 4 review. Joining me, as always, is the usual
Suspects.
suspect, and I'm trying to figure out what Steve is. Steve is saying that there's no audio. Yes, we got that. He's got a little sign here. Let's put it up so we can all see it. No audio. well, Steve will maybe not joining us today. But the rest of us are here and are ready to answer your questions. So while we're waiting for questions to pour in, and while we have so many viewers currently, has anybody got a subject they want to cover on Unit 4 while we're waiting?
Well, you mentioned you had some questions about intervals between the clefs, between the staves, which is confusing because you don't get to just measure the note from one note to the next in the same staff. You have to account for where the note is in one staff and then figure out where the other note is in the other staff and then calculate.
Mm-hmm.
And tricky things can happen, such as notes being a note in the lower staff being actually above the note in the upper staff, which doesn't happen all the time, but it's nasty when it does happen. So I guess the best piece of advice there is to really know your notes solidly, and if you're really unsure, you could even write both notes in the same staff, even if one of them has to have tons of ledger lines, and then you can at least count the lines and spaces that way to double check your work.
Should we pull up a?
Yeah, that would be useful.
Do you want to maybe go all the way back to Unit 1 where we Unit 1 Lesson 5 where we show the uh, space between the clefs?
Yeah, I can do that, but just give me a second to bring it up. If you remind me what lesson that was, it was probably the very first.
I believe it's Unit 1 Lesson 5.
Oh, right. Yes, the grand staff, and how grand it is indeed. Oh yeah, there's some excellent graphics, if we do say so ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and just review this problem of the staves overlapping. So actually backing up a little bit. Well, there was a great, yeah, this is the graphic that I like the best. I hope you can all see that with the F, the C, and the G, because this shows graphically the distance between the bass clef and the treble clef, which normally, as in this staff, they're much further apart. And I don't know if this is too small to see, but there's a B right here, which is actually below the E, or is that even a G? It's an E in this staff, in the bass clef. But this also shows how the two staves are often much further apart, which makes the visual element less useful because it's not actually showing the distance between the notes. You have to rely on their place on the staff and on the lines and spaces. So here we have a really good illustration of how the same note, here's an F, can appear in the treble clef down 3 ledger lines, but in the bass clef it's on the second line. And on the other side of the spectrum, the G in the treble clef is on the second line, but in bass clef that same pitch is 3 ledger lines up. So sometimes people wonder, why would you ever write a G up there? Why not just write it in the treble clef? And this next example provides a great example. The E in the bass clef here, the reason it's being put there in the bass clef and not in the treble is that it's being played by the left hand of the pianist. So it's easier to read actually if those notes are all clumped together in the bass clef. So then, what if somebody asked you? If people feel free to jump in here. What's the interval between this E and this B? That's a question you might get. again, let me know if you can't see it very well, but what you might do in a case like that, to be sure, is move that E up onto the treble clef and make sure you still keep the same exact octave, and then you'll be able to see it much more easily. And if you did that, it would be on the first line of the treble staff, and then you could see that it's a fifth below the B. And like anything, this gets easier the more you do it. So if you're super theory ninjas like us professors, you just look at that and you'd say fifth. It'd be like magic. But if you're not so used to it, you just have to spend time and you'll get used to it, and then you'll be a theory ninja like us.
Oh, wow. Well, then I'm going to sneak on here.
Yeah.
As a ninja. How about if we show them what the interval between the G on the bottom of that chord and the B?
Yeah, that's tricky too.
Yeah, the base of the chord.
Okay, so
I believe the compound interval assignment does go across staffs like that.
yes, compound intervals are again just one more layer of meaning that you have to remember. Compound just means add an octave to the interval. So you can always, if you're faced with an interval that's greater than an octave, it's useful to in your mind, or even better on paper, on your scratch paper, to get rid of that octave. Move one of the notes up an octave, or down an octave, so that they're closer. So you're reducing them down to their closest position. So if you do that, well, there's maybe two ways to think of it. One is to actually just look at the compound interval as a basic number. What is the actual distance? So let's see here. We have an E up here. It's a fifth up to the B. The B down here is an octave up to the B. And if you go an octave, 2 more notes down to the G, that's 8, 9, 10. Octave is 8, 9, 10. So this is actually a tenth from this B to this G. But if you reduce it down, if you moved the B down to this octave, as you already have a B there, then you see that a tenth is very much like a third. Or if you move the G up an octave to this line, you'd have a third between that G and that B. So in your mind, you can remember a third is the reduction. Sorry, it's the reduction of a tenth. So the tenth is the compound interval version of the simple interval of a third. Is that all we need to say, or should we add more?
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah. Please.
So it's a little counterintuitive, because people often want to add 8 to a simple interval to get the compound interval. And so if you take a third and you add an octave to it, you think, oh, an octave is 8, I'll get an 11th. But you have to only add 7 rather than 8, because the 8th note of the scale is equivalent to the first. So it's a little counterintuitive, but when you're moving from simple to compound, the number that you're adding or subtracting is 7 rather than 8, even though an octave is 8. Just remember that there is that overlap with the octaves, and you have to account for that when you're adding.
That's a great point. I'm really bad at that type of thing, and it took me a while to get used to that. And it goes back also to the fact that counting intervals, and this is really key point if you're not clear on this, that when you're counting intervals, it's not a zero-based counting system. The first note is 1, and then you count up from there. So that also, I think that's related to what Dr. Levesque just said, is that you sort of have 1 less than you think. And so those are all things to keep in mind. What else?
Can I add one quick thing on that too?
Yes, please.
Just also a reminder that when you are using compound intervals and the octave is added, it shouldn't affect whether that interval is major or minor. So if you say, in that example, the G to B is a major third, well then when you add that octave, it shouldn't wind up being a minor tenth or an augmented tenth or anything like that. If it's a G to a B, it's a major tenth, or if they're not in the compound interval, the major third. So be careful not to adjust the specific portion of the interval when you add or subtract the octave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's two tricky things here: compound intervals and cross staff, or between two different clefs. So if you can do this, you're doing very well. If you're rusty on it, you will do well once you get it, and you will get it, because it's just a matter of adding each little element together until you get them all going at once in your head. Do we have Steve? No.
Yes, Steve seems to be back. Do we want to just pull up, just do some intervals, just to, go through the process of working out some intervals?
Or should we look at homework, like a specific homework, or is that what you mean? Are you thinking of like the note palette?
Well, I was thinking, we could, pull up the note palette from Module 1, which just lets us look at notes, and then we could just...
Let's do that.
And you could quiz us.
Oh, good idea. All right. That's always fun.
Yeah, and that way we can handle, intervals and inversions.
Yes.
And all that fun stuff.
So should we make it hard on people by using bass clef, or should we use treble clef?
Let's just go for treble.
Okay.
We're looking for clarity.
Yes.
Then we can switch to bass once we've gotten it down a little.
How do you like where I put my treble clef?
Well, you are a maverick.
That is, my treble clef is wrong. It's terrible. Now it's right. That little curly Q should go right around the G line. Okay, good. So why don't we start off with something? I'm gonna put an F here, and then I'm gonna put an E, and then just count notes from there. So E is 1. Again, so it's a zero-less counting system. So if I put E and then F, I go 1, 2. That's a second. Whereas in normal counting, it would be 0, 1, right? But it's a second. If I move it up to the next note, it's 1, 2, 3. Actually, why don't I just add them? What would be clearer? So now we have E, F, G. 1, 2, 3. That's a third. So I'm going to quiz you. I'm going to put these two notes together. What do we have there? Your grade depends on this.
Would you like one of us to answer?
Yes.
Okay.
This one was too easy. You guys are insulted by how easy this was. You don't even have to answer it. I should choose something harder to challenge these theory ninjas.
That's okay. Let me I'll answer this one, but let me go ahead and remake that example on my palette so that my voice doesn't hide that from people hearing it, seeing it.
Oh, I can mute myself too, or
yeah, but I think when I speak, it'll switch over to my picture. So
okay.
Let's just give me a second here.
So Google should invent a way to get around this problem.
Okay. Can you see my example? Is that the right one?
Yep.
Okay. So when I look at this, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out the diatonic interval. And to do that, I'm going to count up from the bottom, as Dr. McClellan mentioned, get 1, 2, 3. So I know this interval is going to be some kind of a third. There are some little tricks, some little tips and tricks you can think of when you're doing these to help yourself catch some mistakes before you get too far along. One of the things I think about is that all the odd simple intervals go from either a space to a space or a line to a line, while the even intervals have a line in a space. So for example, if I have this, which is a fourth, 4 is an even number, one of them's on a line, one's on a space. So I know this is a third because I counted, but I also know it's a third because I know it has to be an odd number because they're both on spaces. In any case, I know it's a third, so now my job is to figure out what kind of third it is. I'm going to count up from the bottom, counting half steps. Now, I'm not going to count E to E as 1 half step because E to E is 0 half steps. This is a bit confusing because when you're counting for the diatonic interval, which is the number, you do count the bottom as 1, but when you're counting the half steps to the quality, you do not count the bottom as 1. So I'm on E to F is 1, to F sharp is 2, to G is 3. And notice I'm counting up from the bottom, even though it comes second. Order doesn't matter. It's which one is lower. And I know that 3 half steps is a minor third rather than a major third. A major third would have been 4 half steps, and I would have gotten 1, 2, 3, 4 to the G sharp. So my answer for this one would be minor third.
I think that's a great point about counting. I put that one from top to bottom deliberately so that would come up that if you're faced with, people often find it easier to count up from the bottom, but if you're faced with an interval that goes down from the top, you can still count it up from the bottom. You just start from the right to left instead, and you can still do the same process. So don't get thrown off by that and feel like you don't know how to do it. You can always just flip it around and do it that way. Should I throw in another maybe a tougher quiz question? I'm going to put an accidental in this time. So I'm going to put an A flat and an F. This is a significantly tougher because one thing I've noticed at least is that the larger the interval gets, the tougher it is. I find it harder because there's just more space to account for, and it's not as easy to immediately spot the interval. But one thing right away you can notice, as Dr. Levesque pointed out, is that one note is on a space and one is on a line, and that you can immediately rule out all of the odd-numbered intervals because those are always going to, this type of interval is always going to be even. So who wants to take a stab at this one?
Well, I mean, I can see just right away that generically from A flat to F, if I count up, just to get the generic interval first, it's A flat, and then the B line, so that's 2, and then 3 for C, 4 for D, 5 for E, 6 for F. So just generically, I know this is going to be some sort of sixth. Beyond that, though, I'm confused. Someone else will.
Actually, this reminds me of a trick that a lot of students, I don't know if it's officially in our lesson, but it's like one of those tricks that I think people find useful. Some people do it this way. So again, every individual has to find the things that work for them, but this works for some people. If you know your scales really, really well, you can use them to figure out the intervals. So for example, if you are just solid on knowing the A-flat scale, you can always take the lowest note of the interval, whether it's on the left or the right or whatever, the lowest note of the interval, and pretend just for a moment that that's the tonic of a scale. And then if you know major and minor scales really well, you can say, okay, we're in A flat, and we know that this is 6 notes away, so the F could be the 6th scale degree. And if you know the A-flat scale, you know what the major scale degree would be in A-flat. And if F fits into that scale, into that major A-flat scale, then you know it's a major 6th. This might sound a little complicated, but if you know scales, it's actually can be a way to simplify it. Let me show you maybe a simpler example. So, for example, if we're in the key of F and we have an A flat above it, so again, it's these 2 notes, the F we're pretending is the tonic, and if we know the F major scale really well, we go F, G, A. Wait a minute, it's not A natural, that would be the major version. It's down 1 half step or 1 semitone from that, so that's the minor version that would fit into F minor, and therefore it's a minor third. Does that make any sense? I hope so.
You know, one way that I think about this, and I realize this may be a little confusing, and I don't want to add more confusion to mix, but if you understand what the accidentals do, then you can actually give yourself a big leg up on understanding what the interval is. So, for example, if you have a flat on the top, that's going to make the interval smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's no corresponding flat in the bottom, then that has actually shrunk the interval. So if you understand that minor is always 1/2 step smaller than major, you would automatically assume that F to A flat is a minor third. And in fact, there are no major intervals with a flat on the top if there isn't one on the bottom. And there are no minor intervals with a sharp on the top if there isn't also a sharp on the bottom. There are these patterns that keep popping up, and if you understand that major is always a 1/2 step higher than minor, then if you look at the positioning of the flats or the sharps, and you understand that a sharp on the bottom makes the interval smaller, but a sharp on the top makes the interval bigger, flat on the top makes it smaller, flat on the bottom makes it bigger, then you can make some assumptions, and you still have to check the assumptions, of course, but you can make some assumptions about the quality of the interval just based on whether or not it's had its size increased or decreased by placing the accidentals.
That's a great point, yeah. And again, as Dr. Lubeck said, there's patterns that come up, so eventually you'll see them often enough that you'll start to recognize it'll become second nature, kind of what tends to happen, and that can really help you. I just added a bass clef because I was thinking of doing a cross staff interval. Should we do that? And we haven't had any sharps yet. How about this one? I'm going to get rid of my other notes to avoid confusion. So this is just a vertical interval from these two notes. And we have a G sharp on the bottom and a D sharp on the top. So what interval is that? As mentioned before, if you wanted to make it easier for yourself, you could move one of the notes into the other staff using ledger lines so that it would be more obvious. And what I mean by that is, well, so then you have to choose which one am I going to move. I happen to know that moving the D sharp will require fewer ledger lines, so I'm going to choose that option. I'm going to put in one ledger line. I'm going to put a D sharp in the bass clef. Whoops. And now this D sharp is actually being written twice, the exact same D sharp. And it's a little easier to see now that it's skipping one space. Both notes are on spaces. So it's going to be an odd numbered interval. And we use our counting. G is 1, A is 2, B is 3, C is 4, and D is 5. And then just to reiterate the major minor scale trick in case that helps people, if you know your scales really, really well, you know that a G sharp scale, major scale, would have a D sharp in it. So you know that in the scale from scale degree 1 to 5 is a perfect fifth. And there you have a perfect fifth. That might be one too many steps. So if what I just said is confusing, ignore me and do whatever was working for you before. But I've had students that really like that trick, so I'm throwing it out there.
I actually have an example. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, in addition to the scale trick, which could be one tool that you use to try and figure out these intervals, you can also always count the number of half steps in the interval once you figure out the generic interval. So in this example, you see the G sharp to the D sharp. We know that that's some sort of fifth. Well, you can count every single half step, and in this case, it would wind up being 7. And there's a beautiful chart in one of the lessons. I think it's the last lesson, the consonance and dissonance lesson, that gives you a complete rundown of every single interval and the most common intervals with the half steps and the least common intervals. And so if you can check your work in that way, if you're more comfortable using the scale method, use the scale method, and then you can check by going through that number of half steps kind of as a backup system. But you have more than one way to get your answer when you're doing these intervals.
That's a really great point. I think using that method of counting by the half steps, if you're the kind of person who you want to be dead sure that you've got it right, that is always the most reliable way. It's often a little more laborious, but it's work that's well worth it, because you can be, if you're doing it carefully, you can be assured that you're getting the exact right interval that way, using the, counting from 0 and going half step, half step, half step up to the next note, and then just using the chart and like, how many half steps do I have? That's the interval.
Can I add?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, can I ask because that's an issue that I've found, and I'm sorry, I had some technical difficulties, so I apologize if I'm repeating anything that was said, but I think Paul's point is really important, and I know that many students will count half steps. I put up a, let's see if you can see this, 2 tritones. The reason I did this was because I've seen that students, what the most common mistake is to count half steps first, and give an answer based on that. And of course, in this case, both being tritones, they sound exactly the same, but one is a fifth. The first one is a diminished fifth, and this is an augmented fourth. If you play them on a piano, they look identical. If you count the half steps, they come out the same, but the answer is different. So I just wanted to remind everybody to avoid that common mistake. Make sure you see your generic interval first, that this is a fifth, then count the half steps, so you know first that you're dealing with a fifth, and similarly here, make sure you see that it's a fourth, and then count your half steps to determine the quality of the interval.
That's a really important point. I'm glad you brought that up, because doing things in the right order is so crucial, and I think that applies to this unit maybe more than any other. Well, it applies to all of them, but you have to always, the generic interval is the number of your that's what makes it a fourth or a fifth or whatever. Is the distance between those 2 note names, and that never changes. So the counting half steps is a secondary step that gets you the exact quality. So if you're somebody that is unsure of this, just remember, do it in the right order, and I'm safe. Yeah.
I'd also add really quickly too, if you're concerned about grade as opposed to just acquiring this musical knowledge, understanding that order is so critical, because if you can just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or A, B, C, D, E, F, G and get the generic interval, you've done half of the battle doing something very, very simple that anyone can do. And so, it's like you've eliminated a lot of possibilities, and then maybe you'll have a little more difficulty determining whether it's major or minor, but at least you've got that one portion of the interval guaranteed every time.
Yeah, great point. You can do yourself a lot of favors by getting a procedure and a practice and a way of going about it down, even if you feel like you're not solid on the concepts. Like, the method is equally important. So what topics have we not covered? Well, one thing to mention is interval pairs. This can be helpful. We haven't talked about inversion. I guess that's a big topic. Have we had any questions yet? I'm just realizing that I haven't seen any. Ask some questions. We love that. That's how we know we're really helping you. Otherwise, we're just blabbing away up here, which we also love doing. All right, so I'm going to take my, and as always, everyone feel free to jump in and interrupt me. I'm just talking. So I'm taking actually, I'm going to use this. I'm going to get rid of these notes. I'm going to use my little minor third that I had up here in the middle of the staff and just get rid of these other ones to avoid confusion. Interval inversion is a big topic, and we may not even get to cover it all, but interval inversion means that it can be confused with compound intervals versus simple intervals, but the crucial difference is that you're switching the order of the notes. So let me show you what I mean. This is a minor third. If I move the E down an octave, I change it from a simple interval to a compound interval, but I have not inverted it because the E is still underneath the G, and that's the crucial thing. So going back here, what does make it inverted is when I actually when I flip them around. Sorry, I'm having trouble getting that placed. When I flip their order, so I move the G below the E, I have now inverted, whoops, God, these notes have a will of their own. Okay, I've now inverted the interval from a third to what? Well, the clue is hiding over here on the side. If you know your interval pairs, you can again, it's one of those simple things you can do to help yourself is memorize those pairs, because you know that if you invert a third, you get a sixth, and that's one of those things that will not change. You can rely on that.
And the inversions always add up to 9.
Yes, exactly. So if you look at we've helpfully organized the lessons to help you remember this. We have the fourths and the fifths together because they add up to 9 and they invert. That's an inversion pair. Thirds and sixths, seconds and sevenths, and then of course octaves and unisons. They add up to 9. So if you're good with that, you're going to sail through this.
We did that on purpose?
As far as I recall.
That didn't just happen?
It could be a pure coincidence, but I'd like to.
It's been a little while, so I just, that you learn something when you do these video chats.
I'd like to believe about that we did it on purpose. I fervently hope so. But anyway, so that gets you 1/2 of the way. And does somebody want to explain about inverting the quality or figuring out the quality? So I'm going to go back to. God, I keep grabbing the wrong one.
Well, you do have the screen thing up, so it might best be easier to let you go ahead and.
I'm having trouble grabbing the G for some reason.
Maybe you're just not. Maybe you're not treating it correctly. Maybe you're scaring the G.
I think I was scaring the G.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move.
Not a good touch there.
So as we established before, this is a minor third, and to me, this became very easy to me. I almost remember the day it happened. It was like a flash of light appeared before me, and I just realized it's so reliable. It's so consistent. If you take two things happen when you invert an interval. The number flips, and that's where you get those inversion pairs. So we have a third becomes a sixth, and then the second thing that happens is the quality flips. And if it was minor, it becomes major. And if it was major, it becomes minor. And again, that's always the case, so you can rely on that. You could almost do this blindfolded. Somebody said, I have a minor third and I inverted it. Well, you say, I flipped the number, becomes a sixth, and I flipped the quality, it becomes major. So this, right away, is a major sixth. In fact, I'll let you in on a little secret of Theory Ninja action, which is that if I see a sixth, it's so much easier for me. I don't even try to calculate the quality of the sixth. In my mind, I flip it to a third, and then I calculate the quality because I find that easier to see, and then I just have it memorized. So if I see this sixth, I think, oh, if that were inverted, it would be a minor third. Therefore, what I'm seeing here is actually a major sixth. I don't know if that helps you, but it's so reliable that you can use that kind of mind trick to get these. Anybody have anything to add there?
I'll actually jump in for a minute. Let me show my page here. Okay, so one of the things that I like to think about, in addition to the inversions of the intervals adding up to 9, is that the half steps from each of the inverted intervals has to equal 12. So if I just take a look at an octave from E flat to E flat, I'm going to have 12 half steps. If I go ahead and if I insert this D here, I'm looking at both the inversion and the regular interval at the same time. The regular interval is E flat to D, the inversion D up to E flat. So if I know that E flat to E flat is 12 half steps, then one of the things I can do is I can use that knowledge to help me figure out how many half steps there are between E flat and D, because that's a lot of half steps to count, and I kind of lose focus after a while, and I might get lost. Anyway, so if I know that E flat down to D is 1 half step, then I know that the remaining 11 half steps have to be between this E flat and this D. And I know that 11 half steps equals a major seventh. So in this way, I actually use the quality inversions, the properties of the inversions, to find out these larger intervals in a safer way. So if I kind of start from scratch and I said, okay, E flat up to D, that's a really big number. I get confused by big numbers. If I were instead to pretend that this was the inversion, D to E flat, this goes back to Dr. McClellan saying about looking at the inversion for the quality. If I know that D to E flat is 1 half step, and I know that E flat to E flat should be 12, this 1 half step is here. That means there has to be 11 half steps remaining here. And again, 11 half steps equals a major seventh. So, you know, inverting intervals can help you more reliably find these larger intervals. You just have to keep in mind that not only do the inverted interval, the diatonic intervals, add up to 9, but the half steps will add up to 12.
Great point. Yeah. So I find that often in theory is that a topic that's later on in the course that might seem like you're adding this layer of complication, like, oh, I learned intervals, now I have to deal with inversions, but actually that inversions can help you do the intervals. So it's kind of circular. It's like once you go further, you can step back and actually go back and get better at what you learned before. So I find that happens often with studying theory. So sometimes if you're not really like 100% confident on a given topic, I recommend just keep going and like keep reading and keep trying, and then leave yourself time to go back and circle around and come back to what you learned before, because often it will just snap into place in your mind because of what you learned afterwards. That won't always happen, but very, very often it does. Have we had any questions?
No, but we've got Nathan saying that makes so much sense.
Oh, good.
So I'm not sure which of you he was speaking to.
It's been all of us.
All of us. Well, do you guys want to? We've kind of gone over the half an hour mark, and
Yeah.
Is there anything else we want to cover before we head out?
Just maybe a quick reminder about the schedule that we moved Unit 3 and 4 back a week, or we extended both of those, but we have not extended Unit 5, so you have less time for Unit 5 than you would have had, but it's a shorter unit and you will be fine. But just as a reminder, it's not like 2 or 3 weeks out. It's actually, when is it? Now that I've said that, I better remind myself exactly when it is.
1 week. 1 week from
Tuesday. Yeah, exactly. So, let us know if this is a problem. We haven't discussed what we would do if people feel like they can't do it in a week. We think that you should be fine, but of course, as always, our goal is to make sure that you do well in the course. So if you feel like this isn't enough time, we are nice people, and we will all go out for a beer together and discuss whether we'd be willing to extend further. But basically try to get it done by next week, and we think you can. So would you all agree with that statement mostly?
Well, I don't drink.
Also, you're in California.
Yeah, no beer for me. But
I just drink Diet Coke, but I drink a lot of it.
Yeah, I drink the Diet Dr. Pepper.
We'll have a virtual drink with all of our preferred beverages in our separate locations.
Yes, but we do discuss and make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of extensions and stuff. And Nathan is saying that the 12 half-step thing is what he was referring to as making much sense.
Excellent. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like everyone has the thing that like makes it click for them, and everyone's different. So if one thing doesn't click for you, keep looking, and there will be that thing that just makes it work.
Yep. That is how music works.
Yep. Anything else? We're getting toward the home stretch.
Yes.
And Unit 5 is am I correct that it's the last one with an exam?
Yes, your last chance to enjoy Proctor Track.
So, you've done Unit 4 already, you only have one more Proctor Track to go. And then Unit 6 is a final project, which is also very important to your grade, but it's not an exam as such. It's something that you can take your time on. So,
yeah.
Great. Well, I'm going to take off my screen sharing.
Yeah. So I think probably we should just wrap it up, unless anybody wants to share their favorite Proctor Track moments that they've.
I would like to say that having reviewed some students doing your Proctor Track, doing your exams, some of you look really stressed out. Like I see your faces, and you look nervous, and you look anxious, and
why do we see their faces? Because Proctor Track, says there's something we need to check on. Yeah.
Because maybe you went like this, where your face went off the screen.
Or my favorite is the one that gets where I have like 50 instances of facial expression because you're chewing gum.
Yeah.
And it thinks you're talking. I had this one girl who was like running around her sorority house looking for an empty room, and it was like Blair Witch Project because you got the camera in someone's face as they're running. That was pretty good.
I had one where somebody's mother, presumably your mother, or some other friend or relative was in the background, and you turned around and looked briefly irritated, and then they went away.
I had one where a boyfriend was hanging over the shoulder, like making all these gestures and faces at the camera, like while the student was trying to take the test. I really enjoyed that one. Actually.
I had a smoker. I can tell you that Proctor Track does not approve of smoking.
No.
Very judgmental.
Yes. Proctor. But
we are not. We are accepting, and unless you're really doing something terrible, we clear you through. So.
And remember, it's just an algorithm. It doesn't know that the person behind you isn't giving you the answers, or it's just walking through. So it's just that's our job to double check. But we make those decisions extremely quickly, and then we move on. So no worries.
There is a sensitive human being at the other end.
Yeah.
Always. It's not just a machine.
Yeah, we appreciate you telling us if you felt like I've got students who say, "Oh, I feel like I'm going to get flagged because of X or Y or Z," and yeah, you might get flagged, but that doesn't mean anything. We'll just unless you have someone sitting there giving you the answers or something, it's pretty much you're good to go. So now that we went off on that tangent, as entertaining as it was, I'm going to sign us off. So from California and Dr. Wilcox to Professor McClellan, and I'll let you say goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone. Cheers. Happy
good night from scenic Bloomsbury, New Jersey.
Good night, everyone. Good luck with the rest of the unit.
Good night. Enjoy it.
All right. That's it. Good night.